talk it up with Tiger Talk.
Today, myself and Alex are joined by Mrs. Daquelente, and we'll be talking about cognitive biases. First of all, what is a cognitive bias?
A cognitive bias is just the way that our brains comprehend and then piece together new information with information that we already know. And it's often impacted by the fact that we're kind of operating on old hardware. So, we had a certain amount, things that we needed to do to be able to make critical thinking decisions on a day-to-day basis back when we were, in our caveman days, that we don't necessarily need today. So the difference between them sometimes takes us off on a path that is not necessarily leading to a logical conclusion.
What are the most common types of cognitive bias?
Well, theoretically they're all common, but I suppose ones that you might hear about, like in the news lately, would be confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is when we will filter through new information that actually supports our original position, and filter out new information that might contradict what we believe to be true. So in an instance where we're learning about, let's just say a controversial issue where we come into the situation with preconceived notions, even if there's outstanding information to the contrary, our brains are programmed to eliminate those. The other one that I would say is probably fairly common to be heard about would be backfire effect. Backfire effect is when let's just say you're talking to someone about a topic like capital punishment. People have really distinct beliefs about whether or not they think the death penalty is something that can be used or should be used. So the backfire effect basically says that if you feel very passionately about a particular subject and someone else tries adamantly to get you to think the opposite way, you are more likely to be further entrenched in your original beliefs than you are to ever turn over and agree with the other person. So when we're talking about controversial issues or things like politics, what this does is create political echo chambers where we're more or less either A, talking to people who are going to just continue to validate our biases already for confirmation bias, or you see things like people getting into fight on social media or in person trying to change the other person's mind, and it's actually backfiring. It's making that person even more entrenched than more apt to change their mind altogether.
You mentioned the confirmation bias. I also see there's an anchoring bias. Is there I feel like those sound similar, like conforming and being anchored to something. Is there a difference there, similarities there?
Yeah, I would say so, because anchoring has more to do with the first time you're introduced to a subject. So let's just say that the first time that you are introduced to, back to capital punishment, the first time you're introduced to that is in your Sunday school class, and the teacher is talking about a certain biblical story, and it's framed as if either the death penalty is good or the death penalty is bad, because that becomes sort of like a part of your core memory. That original positive or negative association tends to stick with us. And it does, that type of formation, because of the way our synapses work, takes seconds to create, but a really, really long time to overcome.
So somebody could have a whole belief system that can be shaped off the first time they saw it, and they could kind of weigh themselves down in it by when they look through information on it, through that confirmation bias.
Sure. And it makes sense if you're, forgive me for my timeline fallibility here, but if you're trying to avoid getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, if you have a specific route that you take because you're going to be free from saber-toothed tigers, you're just going to kind of go along with that because that's the safest way for you to work through your life. You're not going to maybe be open to your friend's suggestion to go down by the watering hole first, because what's gotten you success is something you want to repeat doing. And that helped us back in the past, but now when we're faced with new issues and maybe new research comes out, or you even just want to be a 21st century person with a philosophical open mind, it's a lot more challenging to kind of stop ourselves in this subconscious act, which was what a confirmation bias is, and really kind of force yourself to stay open-minded and allow for new information to be correlated with the old information that you already have.
How can we avoid common biases in our society?
It's hard. It is second nature for us, and sometimes we have sometimes we're more aware of ourselves than others. So for example, if you're just scrolling on social media, clearly our social media profiles, our For You pages are curated based on things that we've liked in the past. So if you're mindlessly scrolling, we're not going to be aware of, our confirmation bias, for example, like we talked about earlier, because we're not being confronted with new information. Mm-hmm. So unless you're actively going out and challenging yourself to read other perspectives or to try new things or to, make acquaintances with people that you've never, spoken to before, it's very likely that those things will fly under the radar.
I feel like it's very common, like for the algorithms, like if you're on TikTok or something, if you like one video like this, you're going to see 100 more videos like that. Well,
right.
I mean, that's a little hyperbole, but still.
Right.
At one point, if you see something that it goes with what you agree with, and then you like it, and then you just see more of that, and you just kind of confirm it with that confirmation bias.
Yeah. Now, there are others, I will say, like the halo effect or the framing effect, that are a little easier to catch. So, for example, the halo effect is the idea that most of us tend to appreciate things. Like, we think that what is most beautiful or what is most new is automatically best, and things that are old or not as attractive or have less value. So whether you're in let's say an interview, and you can stop yourself and say, okay, is this person the best candidate for the job, or is it because they're the tallest candidate for the job and I somehow have a bias towards tall people? Or with framing effect, framing effect takes us back to when JFK was running for president, and people were watching him during the debate, and he was the one with the makeup on and had a polished appearance.
I was just learning about that.
Yes. And so people tend to think okay, I'm being introduced to this, and what is the context in which I'm being introduced to it? Do they look and seem and feel better?
Because Mr.
Then
New
they're
was telling
superior.
us that debate, a lot of people who had it on the radio thought that it was Nixon, right? Mm-hmm. Nixon was winning at the time, but then people who watched it thought it was, because it was Nixon and JFK.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, people who were watching it live on their television thought that JFK was doing better, even though really they weren't. It might not have had as much to do with the substance as it did the way they carried
polls
themselves.
have proven decade after decade that people do often vote for the candidate who they feel is more attractive or has the most, regal sounding name. And where this becomes really interesting, where we can take this sort of, it's kind of maybe mean to say soft science, but cognitive science, and turn it into real life results, is when lawyers do jury selection. Because they've got to be able to ask questions of those potential jurors that if, let's just say, you look at a defendant and they're young and attractive, maybe they in their mind will think that just because they're young and attractive, they must be innocent. So they have to be able to formulate questions to get at those answers, to kind of reveal those biases in indirect ways, because nobody wants to, air their dirty laundry, in front of other people. We try to hide those biases, or we even hide them from ourselves.
Yeah. Also, the Dunning-Kruger effect. I've heard that one before, and I feel like that's an important one. If you want to highlight that one for us.
Have you ever heard of the imposter syndrome?
I think a little bit.
It's a pop psychology term, but it's this idea that even if you are one of the most knowledgeable people in the room about something, you will doubt yourself. Well, there is a quote out there, and I hope I don't cite as the English teacher, but I want to say it was General Schwarzkopf that said, there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns, meaning you know what you know. If you know a ton about something, you know enough to know that you have new things to learn. And then if you don't know much about a topic, you don't even know where to start because you have absolutely no context to put information in. So with Dunning-Kruger, oftentimes people that know the most about a subject will actually feel self-conscious and underestimate their knowledge simply because they know there's a vast amount of knowledge out there to still be attained.
Yeah, I feel like always when you're thinking of a certain set of things or something or topic you're familiar with, I feel like you always imagine the unknown as large. Really, when you imagine an unknown anywhere, it just always feels large because you can't really observe it. Yeah.
And then the opposite of that is the curse of knowledge bias. So curse of knowledge bias is something that teachers, when we get trained, they caution us about specifically, because if you are an expert in an area, or at least well-versed in an area, you tend to believe that that subject is easy to master or easy to understand. And so you have a difficult time putting yourself in your students' shoes to help them to sort of get to the place where they can also master the material. So if it's easy to you, then you might skip over steps or explain things using a lot of technical jargon or something, where a student will be left in the dust. So.
Why do you think it's so important that we recognize our own biases?
Because it's a big world out there, and we all live in like these little ponds, but eventually we're gonna go into a bigger world and talk to people who are a lot different than we are and experience a lot of new things. And I think it's a sad existence where we feel like if a person feels like they have nothing left to learn, you know? So if we challenge our cognitive biases and we continue to hold ourselves to a higher standard, then kind of the sky's the limit in what we can achieve, what we can learn.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
We
Thank you for having
appreciate
me.
all
I
your
appreciate
information,
it.
and we'll see everybody else next week on Tiger Talk.